He's playing guitar.
Oh no. Where's that at?
On Main Street with their one.
No, I didn't know that.
I went to farmer's market.
My goodness.
Good morning, Bob. Good morning, Pastor. Orthopedic Monday.
Oh, good luck with that.
Uh-huh.
Inhale.
Okay.
So before we get started, I'll let the ladies, since there's 5 of us here, the mission jars are due and for the fall. So in the next couple of Sundays, your mission jar with your coins,
Gotcha.
bring those in, so I'll send that off.
Good morning. I set chairs like this so you can.
That's okay, I'm not taking one in the near future, I mean, in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks probably.
Anywhere you'd like to sit. Yep. Bob is here. Bob is there.
Okay, so let's go to the front row now. And you can hear.
The smart ones are at the front of the.
Yeah. Thank you for spreading out.
Here.
Right here is or
Right here.
right here is great.
Yeah.
And more than three schools.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so after.
Book of Ruth, page 188, if you're using the Bible on the table. We'll start in a minute. Page 188.
Is it on there?
We good, Lou? Page 188. Oh, I forgot to. Lou, did you get a lesson? There's one on the chair here. Study guide? Okay. We'll wait one more minute here. Shorter lesson today. Last week we had to cover quite a bit of ground with an introduction to the book and then going through chapter 1 as well. So we did. Hello, come on in. Just spread out the chairs, but grab one here for yourself. The two of you can sit together. We got one sitting right here already.
Okay.
So maybe over here would be great.
Okay.
Grab them a chair. Thank you. So today we have a little bit more time to discuss, so we can slow down. If you have questions about something, feel free to ask. So because we don't have as much ground to cover. Let's begin with a prayer. Lord Jesus, in every age you have cared for your people. You've always provided spiritual nourishment through your gospel. Even in times of wickedness, your gospel was there proclaiming forgiveness to those who were repentant. And yet you also care for your people physically as well. We ask you to be with us this morning as we see how you provided for Naomi and Ruth, how you used godly people, how you raised up those to care for your people, and ultimately use them to bring us a Savior. We ask you to guide our discussion this morning and fill us with your Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello, find a seat. Thank you. So, lesson 1. I don't have the title of the study on your study guide. Does anybody remember what it was? Divine Hope Amid Hopelessness, the emptying and filling of Naomi. That's important for us to remember. Divine hope amid hopelessness, the emptying and filling of Naomi. Well, Naomi, not Ruth. So let's remind ourselves, in what way was Naomi emptied in the first chapter.
Oh, she lost everything.
All right, she lost everything. You'll have to grab a chair, Bethany, and we got some seats up here. Hello, Mona. Grab a chair. We've got seats in the back if you want to be a little more distant. We also have study guides there. Thank you. So she lost everything. They're in first of all, the famine, probably the result of a drought. They moved to Moab. They've got nothing. Elimelech, her husband, dies. Then her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, die. After 10 years of being there, she hears that God has come to the aid of his people. And so at the very end of chapter 1, Naomi and Ruth are heading back to Bethlehem. And as they're going back, the final verse of chapter 1, as they're heading back, how does the final verse of chapter 1 set us up for chapter 2? What does it say? End of chapter 1. What was happening? The harvest. And imagine this being a production, a play. Imagine Naomi and Ruth are seeing in the distance the fields that are ripe. It's barley harvest time. They even see workers out there in the fields as they're making their way the last mile or two into Bethlehem, and the curtain falls, right? All right, now, chapter 2. Act 2, acceptance and sufficiency. Chapter 2, verses 1 to 17. Follow along as I read it, please. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they called back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland, and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. That's as far as we're going to go. Ephah is about 3/5 of a bushel. A substantial amount for one person to gather, thresh, and she'd likely put it in a bag, probably her shawl. She wrapped it, and then in those biblical times, they would carry it on their heads back into town then. Some commentators feel 3/5 of a bushel, probably about 35 to 40 pounds of barley. That is an amazing amount. Enough for 2 people for 2 weeks has been estimated. This was just the first day of her gleaning. Anybody have any quick questions about those 17 verses before we get into them one by one? Notice the subject of this first scene. Acceptance. Here we go. The Hebrew text describes Boaz as an Ish Gibor Chayil. Ish is the word for male. Can mean husband. Gibor Chayil, which can be translated a property owner, a warrior, a man of material wealth, or a man of honor and esteem. At the end of this section, you'll be asked which one you prefer. The NIV says, a man of standing. A man of standing. What does that mean? If you're using a different translation, what does your translation say? Anybody else got something? I did not look at the EHV. Anybody else? I guess not. That's okay. All right, a man of standing. Well, let's see what we think when we get done with this section. So she goes to the field of Boaz. What does the name Boaz mean? Anybody know? It means strength. It means strength. We run into it one more time in the Old Testament. When Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, there were 2 pillars at the entrance, and one of them was named Boaz. Not necessarily after this man, but because the word in Hebrew means strength. Number 3, again, Ruth is described as a Moabitess, a non-resident of Israel. How does that fact impact what she was about to do? What did she go to do?
Glean in a field.
Glean in a field. And she's a Moabitess. What kind of tension would there be?
She's the outsider.
She's the outsider. What are you doing in this field? You are not even an Israelite. Get out of here. Or go somewhere else. You're not welcome here. She's a Moabite. Number 4. What did God's law allow the poor to do? Leviticus 19. If you're using the Bible on the table, I forgot to look up the page number. Leviticus 19 is on page 85, 84, 85. Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10. Take a look at that.
Be pretty thorough.
Don't be so thorough. Leave some there. Why?
For the poor.
For the poor, and notice what else it says. And the alien. So even though Ruth was a Moabitess, the law of God told Jewish property owners, field owners, leave that there. Now, if you were not a son or daughter of the covenant, you are not allowed. But these are aliens, people who have come to faith in the God of the children of Israel. So leave it for the poor and the alien. This was God's welfare system. There were 2 protections in Israel, at least it was supposed to work. First of all, the Lord owned the land. The people they had their sections of property, but the Lord made it very clear, the land is mine. I'm just allowing you to live on it, to grow crops. He did not want land to be bought and sold. Sold and for wealthy people to amass huge tracts of land. And so that he could protect against that, every 7 years, there was a resetting. Debts were canceled. Land had to revert, things like that. So God set these things up because he knew that sinful hearts are greedy. On the other side of this is he did care for the poor and the needy. He told these landowners, do not glean to the very edges of your field. Allow that for the poor and the alien. So, again, there was still this tension. Ruth was a Moabitess, and even though the law of God allowed for her to do this, it wasn't the most comfortable situation for her to be in. Any questions on that so far? All right. Remember, yes, Darlene.
What exactly is the difference between an Israelite and a Moabite? Just the God?
Yes, but also the line. The Israelites were reckoned through Abraham. The Moabites came through Lot. So they would be still, they would still be considered a Gentile people because they were not of the line of Abraham. Relatives of the Jews, but vile people. Gross immorality in their worship practices, and as I mentioned last week, a part of their worship practice was the sacrifice of their children to Shemash, their main god. All right, so remember again the title of this study, The Emptying and Filling of Naomi. Chapter 1, she gets empty. How is the Lord filling Naomi?
With food.
With food through Ruth, but also through Boaz.
Did Naomi know at that time that Boaz was
A relative?
relative?
Yes. Yes, she did. We're going to see that at the end of the chapter today. Naomi knew Boaz. How closely, we're not sure. He was not Elimelech's brother, because Elimelech had no living brother at this time. Otherwise, Naomi could have counted on him for security, food, housing, etc. That was her problem. She was completely empty. Next chapter we're going to meet, there was another relative who was a little closer family-wise to Elimelech, but Boaz was one of them too, just a little more distant. Again, we don't know exactly what the family line was there. They seem to all be from the same clan as Elimelech was. Yes, Bob?
What is a clan?
A certain line. So when the Jew, after the 12, the patriarchs, then their sons began clans. If you read in Exodus and Leviticus, we start talking about clans. So they would be the grandsons of Jacob would establish these clans in Israel. All right, so the Lord was filling Naomi through Ruth and ultimately, as we said, through Boaz. Verse 3b, interesting verse. The NIV says, as it turned out, she found herself gleaning in the field of Boaz. The Hebrew says, her happenstance happened. Very unusual in Hebrew. So as this story is being read out loud, which is what it's intended to be, and people were listening to this, as a Jewish person, what's your reaction to that? Her happenstance happened. What are you thinking?
What was supposed to happen?
It was supposed to. Here you have Naomi coming back with nothing. And Ruth, if you look at the rest of the story, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and ultimately, Ruth becomes an ancestress of the Savior. This is the hand of God. If you're a Jewish person listening to this, you start smiling. Oh, sure, it wasn't by chance. This was the Lord. And we're going to get into that now, what a critical part the Lord played in the lives of these people, which is amazing when you flip back into the book of Judges and look what was going on at this time. It was deplorable. But here are these shining lights of God's people. He never lets that lamp get extinguished. He always maintains a remnant of people for himself who are faithful to him. And through them, he is faithful to his promise to bring a Savior into the world. This isn't chance. This is God directing everything. So Boaz, it says he comes out to the field. So he wasn't there right away in the morning. He's got a foreman. He talks to the foreman a little later. The foreman has harvesters, okay? He comes out to see how things are going. Remember, Farmers didn't live there in the field. The people lived in the cities, in the towns, in the villages, and then their fields were outside of the village, the town of Bethlehem. There were no fences. You just had a portion of it. Each person knew what portion was his. So Boaz comes out there to see how things are going. It's about midday. And he shouts a greeting to his worker. What does his greeting convey?
He was interested in her.
Oh, let's back up to the workers first.
I love the Lord.
I love the Lord bless you. What does he say here specifically? The Lord be with you, he says to the harvester. What does that remind you of? Church, the blessing you receive at the end of each service. The Lord be with you. Or what we say in the greeting each other after the confession of sins. The Lord be with you and also with you. And the name Boaz used, he did not say El Shaddai be with you. He did not say Elohim be with you. He said the Lord. He would have used the word Adonai, not Yahweh. They never said that one. And what does that name convey to God's people? Bob.
He is a covenant Lord
He
who
is
protects
a
them.
covenant God who is faithful to his promises to his people. He's the God who is slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. That's that special name. And Boaz used that as he greets his workers. It's intentional. He does not simply say shalom. He could have. That was the common greeting. No, he gives them this blessing. And notice what the workers say in response. What do they say? Back to Boaz. The Lord bless you. Now, as workers in a harvest field, what do you suppose they are thinking about? They're harvesting. What are they thinking about? The harvest, which was so important, which had been missing for several years. They know that they are dependent upon Boaz for their livelihood, and that means there needs to be a crop. And so they are praying for the Lord to bless Boaz and everything Boaz has as well, because they know how critical that is. God promised, he said, the Lord said, I promise your crops will grow. You follow me, you will have so much, you won't know what to do with it. And they were counting on Boaz to enable them to take care of themselves and their family. All right, what truth does verse 7 convey about Ruth's character? What truths? I think I saw a couple of them at least.
Well, she was generous and loving because she took care of him.
All right. What kind of daughter-in-law would do that? Remember what she had done. I promised to follow you. She knew she was sacrificing everything when she said, no, where you go, I will go. She knew there was nothing left for her in Israel. She could expect nothing. And she was devoted. Go, I love you, Naomi. What else does it say about her?
It's polite. She asked
Yes.
permission to glean the field.
What a gracious person. She didn't go in there and say, Leviticus 19 says I can be here. So she didn't say that. I have a right to this. I expect you to take care of me. Boaz, you have stuff. I have nothing. This really is mine. No way. She was so polite. Anything else in verse 7?
She's a hard worker.
She was a hard worker. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. This was tough work, people. Back-breaking work. All by hand. Bending over all day long in the sun. She only took one short break. That's amazing. She has some tremendous qualities, so admirable. And she was a Moabite. Only one thing could have changed her heart like that, is that's the gospel of God. In verse number 10, in verse 8, Boaz refers to Ruth as my daughter. How does this fact convey acceptance? What is he saying to her?
He's part of the family.
Yes, my family and the covenant. You are a daughter of Israel. See, when we translate children of Israel in the Old Testament, in the NIV, it really says sons of Israel, B'nai Yisrael. That's a very term full of meaning, B'nai Yisrael, sons of Israel. She was a daughter of Israel. You are under God's covenant. And as such, I'm here. God had given specific things that he wanted the men in Israel to do. And he is now saying, you're my daughter because you are under the covenant along with me. And so I have responsibilities to you, Ruth, because you have, by God's grace, come into this covenant, the same covenant I am under. We have responsibilities toward you. And I am going to see that those responsibilities are taken care of. This was full of meaning. He did not call her a Moabitess. He did not spit and call her a Gentile, which is what the Jews usually do, goyim. And they, I can't do it because I got my mask on. They'd scrunch up their nose and spit when they said the word goyim. That's who she was. You don't hear a word of that. None of that attitude even in the heart of Boaz. Number 11, undoubtedly, Boaz was not speaking privately to Ruth. They're out in a field. He's speaking out loud. What he stated to her in verses 8 and 9 was meant to be heard by all his workers. What was he telling them?
Respect her.
Respect her. She is a daughter of Israel. Treat her as God would as a young woman. What else was he saying?
He wants him to help.
Help her. Verses 8 and 9, he says, I have told the men not to touch you. There could, in the Hebrew verb there could be the concept or the shade of meaning of molest you, but probably more, I don't want any sexual harassment going on here. One commentator wrote, this is the first incidence in the history of the world of a workplace policy on sexual harassment. Boaz has a field. These people are under his purview. He is the one responsible for the activity that goes on there. And he says, don't touch that girl. I want you to respect her. Don't be talking trash to her. I want you to honor her as you honor me. He's stating that for everyone to hear. Number 12, note the division of work. He's got a foreman, okay? Then he's got harvesters, servant girls, Ruth. So here's how the barley harvest went. The harvesters were men. It was hard work. They especially like to begin early in the morning from what I read, because it might still be dew on the stalks of barley, which would make them easier to handle. And then they would cut them off at the base and lay them down. And they would keep moving on. Then after them would come these servant girls. And they would gather them into bundles and carry them to the edge of the field or wherever, and then later on into the wherever to be threshed. After that, you had Ruth. So that's what was going on here. Don't necessarily think that these servant girls were slaves or owned by Boaz. That's possible. It's possible. But recall how often Jesus told the parable about workers in the field. Remember that one? The owner early in the day, the owner went into the marketplace and hired some workers and sent them out into his work. And then he went back 3 hours later. Then he went back 3 hours later, hired more workers. I think that's more what was going on here. These people were hired by Boaz to do this. And the terms harvesters, servant girls is just a term, not necessarily meant to say that they belonged to Boaz. But you could make that case. And if you did, it might affect how you answer number 1. But more common, you have all these fields outside of Bethlehem. And they would have to hire workers to do this work. It was limited time, about a month that the harvest lasted. A little over a month. You only needed these workers for a short amount of time. You don't need them the rest of when you sow the seed, maybe. Then you just let things go. Okay? All right, number 13. What admirable personality traits does Ruth display in verse 10? And what impression had she already made? Verse 11.
Humble.
Ah, so humble. He recognized this was a gift of grace to her. She was a foreigner. That's what she says. She just comes right out and says it. I don't belong here. I'm not one of you. And yet you are showing such tremendous favor to me. I'm unworthy of this. You don't owe me this, and yet you're doing it. She bows with her head to the ground. Again, this is a common thing. Expressing such humbleness and thankfulness. The leper who was healed by Jesus did the same thing. He came back and bowed before the Lord and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. So this was a common thing, but it expresses deep humility and gratitude. What admirable traits. Now, what impression had she already made according to verse 11?
She left everything she knew to come home and to follow Naomi to her home.
And Boaz already knows about this. He doesn't have to ask her story. Now, did he know? He asked in the beginning a little earlier, whose woman is this? The Hebrew there could simply say, who is this? I took a look at it. Who is this? Who is this woman? Did he not know? Maybe he knew her name but didn't know her face. But he did know the story had been told. Bethlehem was not a big town. The story had been told of everything she had done. She had left her mother and her father. She had left what would have been a much easier life in Moab. She could have gotten remarried and taken care of very well and had children. But she left all that. And what was the reason she did that? Pardon me?
For the love of her mother.
All right. And the love of her God. She loved her mother-in-law, and she came to love the God of the Jews. I'm not going back there. Not to those false gods. This means too much to me. My relationship with you, Naomi, and my relationship with your God, who is now my God. And again, we took a look at that last week. That probably happened in a short period of time. Mahlon and Kilian probably got married more towards the end of that 10-year period. So in a year or two's time, maybe, she came to know the God of the Jews, the only true God. An amazing thing.
Well, her husband was probably new.
Absolutely. Mahlon and Kilian were children of Israel, absolutely. And they shared their faith. But we know of other instances in which Jewish men married Gentile women who were not daughters of the covenant, and God had forbidden that. Likewise, the other occurred too. All right, number 14. Boaz says, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Is Boaz saying that the Lord rewards good works? If not, what is he saying?
God would bless her.
Yes. You read the word blessed there. He uses the word rewards. He could have used the word blessed. But there are rewards of grace. Jesus speaks about that in the New Testament. He's not denying that we are saved. Boaz was not saying that we are saved by good works, and that because Ruth has done these things, she deserves God to do this for her. No, but may God bless you in a spiritual sense, in a good sense, in a biblical sense. May he reward you for everything you've done. And notice again the name that he uses for the God of the children of Israel. Lord, the God of the covenant. That's all grace. Every time a Jew heard that name, he was supposed to think of the grace of his God, who bound himself to a covenant with sinful people, because that's who he is. Again, he is not talking about work righteousness or deserving something because she did something good. Now, this was quid pro quo. Not at all. Next one. Yes, go ahead.
Can we file that under, okay, when we do something bad or naughty, there's consequences to it.
True.
So can we turn that around and say, when we do the right, because the commandment to honor your parents, there's a blessing to that.
There is.
So that's kind of what category I'm kind of putting this in.
True. I like that.
It's
I like
the
that.
consequence of
I like
choosing
that.
the right path.
Fourth commandment, God promises blessings if we honor those who are our superiors. And indeed, that is the case here. There's going to be some language they use where Ruth recognizes, this is my superior. Verse 12, by the way, some commentators feel verse 12 is the center and the most important verse in the book. If you know the rest of Ruth's story, why would you say that? Because it all turned out wonderful. Solely by the grace of God. This Moabite becomes an ancestress of the Savior. Incredible. Indeed, God did reward her for leaving everything behind in Moab. We're reading about her today because she was faithful to the Lord and the Lord was faithful to her. So a lot of commentators feel verse 12 is the center of the theme of the book. I'm talking a lot. Number 15, how did Boaz further convey his acceptance of Ruth? Verse 14. What did he do with her?
Better.
He ate with her. He sat down there and ate with her.
They had their first date.
Again, Jews don't eat with Gentiles. That's forbidden. Oh, they don't do that. At least forbidden in the minds of some. Come over here. Eat with me. Have some bread. Dip it in some vinegar, wine vinegar. The bread was pretty hard, and the commentators feel you dip it in the wine vinegar to make it soft, a little bit easier to eat. Okay? But now notice Boaz's generosity in verses 15 and 16. By the way, I should have mentioned also in verse 14, what else did Boaz offer her? Way beyond what he needed to do. At beginning of verse 14, end of verse 14. Roasted grain. Whoa. All right. Now, note the extent of Boaz's generosity, verses 15 to 16. What things did Boaz, let's just, you got them there in front of you, but let's not miss them. Even if she gathers among the sheaves. Whoa. Don't embarrass her. Let her do it. In fact, pull some of the sheaves out, or pull some of the stalks out, and leave them there for her. That's unheard of. Those were Boaz's. This is what the whole harvest was about, and now he's saying, I'm just going to give some away to her. Amazing. Don't rebuke her. And then we noted already the amount of barley she gathered. 35 to 40 pounds, maybe. Again, it's hard to estimate here. 3/5 of a bushel is what your notes say. Tough to, but it was an amazing amount. So now back to question 1. Which translation of the description of Boaz do you prefer? Up above. A man of honor and esteem. I like that one. A wealthy landowner, property owner. Again, the Hebrew words here are tough. It can mean, like it says, the Hebrew word there can mean anything from a warrior to an admired man.
He could really be all of it.
He could be all of
Well,
it.
I was going to say, it
Yeah.
could be all encompassing.
Yeah. Anyway, those Hebrew words would bring to mind all these things which they don't to you and to me. All right, application. What prevents you from accepting others, especially people you've just met?
Trust.
I know it.
What's their motive?
What's their motive? What do they want from me?
Yeah, what do they want?
What do they want? I don't know if I can trust this person. If I open myself up to them, how does the example of Boaz help you overcome this reluctance? Again and again, to whom did he refer? The Lord. I'm going to put my confidence in my God. I'm going to do what I believe he wants me to do in this situation. And if I get taken advantage of, so be it. I've got the Lord on my side. I'm going to do what my God asks of me, thinks I should do. I'm going to show love to this person. Now, that doesn't mean you intentionally put yourself in harm's way. Do not test the Lord. But so often we build up these walls because we don't want to get taken advantage of. Here, Boaz just lays it out. He goes beyond what God commanded in his law. But the Spirit, he again and again obeys the spirit of the law, which is to care for the poor and the alien. And absolutely, Naomi and Ruth were poor. They were dirt poor. They had nothing. Anybody else on this first side? Questions?
He had already heard about it.
I know it. So he understood how wonderful she was. You are right. You are right. I've heard everything you've done. Yeah, but, so often we don't have that advantage.
Right.
Anybody else? Good point, Grace. All right, let's go back. We only have a few verses here. Let's see if we can get them done in about 10 minutes. Verses 18 to 23. What's the title of section 2? Sufficiency. First chapter, nothing. Tragedy, hopelessness. They have nothing. Now suddenly, sufficiency. Here we go. Verses 18 to 23. She carried it back to town, the ephah of grain, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Is that tender or what? Pulls out this little cloth. She's got barley and bread in it for her mother. Roasted grain. Is that tender or what? Ruth also brought, verse 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. So imagine this story she tells about her day, right? Yeah, before the sun was up, I was out there and I'm marching along. And imagine her telling that whole story. Imagine her telling about the lunch. About the fact that she didn't have to go get water because Boaz said, "You can have some of the water from my workers gather." Otherwise, she'd have had to go all the way back to Bethlehem and to the well and get some. Imagine her telling her mother-in-law all about this, everything that had happened to her. And then she says, "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz." Again, the Hebrew, the very last word in that sentence is just as it is in English, Boaz. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close. Cling is the Hebrew word there. The same word that was used in chapter 1 when it says Ruth clung to her mother-in-law. Here's the same word again. Until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. All right, let's take a look. Any quick questions? How was the Lord filling Naomi? Verse 18. With food from Ruth, ultimately from Boaz. The Lord was using Boaz. Ruth was the mediator to bring food to Naomi, filling her. Number 2, recall that the story of Ruth is an example of an ancient short story that was read aloud and heard by others. What great storing technique is involved in verse 19b. Whose field did you glean in? Where did you go today? And she starts out on this long story. And she leaves the information that Naomi wants till the very end. Great storytelling technique. Again, you're listening to this and the Jewish person is imagining this. And there it is. The surprise, right? Again, this is one of a great example, one of the greatest example of an ancient novel in Hebrew. Number 3, what Hebrew word is translated kindness in verse 20? Remember that important word from the last lesson? I said the most important word in the book of Ruth is chesed, faithfulness. Also could be translated kindness. The King James Version translates it mercy, which is how does that come? That's a long story too. Kindness, faithfulness, love. In what way was the Lord being faithful to Naomi's dead?
He's protecting them.
All right.
Provided.
All right. Pardon?
He provided.
All right. The people who were supposed to take care of Naomi were in heaven. And the Lord was blessing them. But now he is also showing kindness to them by, I'm going to take care of your widows. You don't have to worry. They'll be as if they could in heaven. He's showing kindness to them. The Lord was using Boaz to fill Naomi's need for food. As Naomi spoke the words of 20b, knowing what's coming in chapter 3, what other role for Boaz likely crossed her mind? We need food. Boaz is providing it. What else does she need? A husband or someone to provide a son for her. Remember, in the beginning, I can't have a son. Even if I got married today, I wouldn't be able to have a child. And now you don't have children either. It's got to be crossing her mind because of what happens in the very next chapter. She links the two together. The kinsman redeemer, that had to, I asked that question. What was the role of the kinsman redeemer again? Goel is the word for redeemer. What was he supposed to do? This is not levirate marriage. The kinsman redeemer was supposed to buy the property back. What you're really doing is buying the crops. So it's supposed to be your brother, your closest relative. So this guy for whatever reason, got tremendous debts. He's got to sell the next few years of his crops. You only sold, the price was based on how many harvests are left till the 7th year. Everything was only for 7 years. So let's say you're in year 2. Well, I got this many more crops here. You would purchase the crops. The kinsman redeemer was supposed to come in and say, I'll buy those back so that it stays in the family. He was supposed to help his brother out by doing that. So that was the role that Boaz was going to play here in the next chapter. I will buy the crops from Elimelech's field so that it stays in the family, because it had been sold out of the family.
But if the other guy would have thought that he would have had to provide for Naomi, right?
He should have. But since this was probably sold outside of the clan, he wasn't obligated to take care of Naomi and Ruth. Boaz comes in, purchases the next few years of crops, and with that is also saying, I will provide for you now. And so in her mind, she goes, here, I got one more big need, and that is I need an heir. I need a son who will keep this land for our family. That's got to be crossing her mind because of what she does in chapter 3. And she doesn't wait a minute. She doesn't wait a minute to start this plan. We're going to get into that next week. What additional favor did Boaz bestow on Ruth? Verse 21. And until they have harvested what? All my grain. This was the barley harvest. Barley ripened first. Think right around the Passover time, okay? Shortly after Passover, middle of April, barley ripened. Right after that, the wheat ripens. And then on the day of Pentecost, that's the harvest festival, 50 days later. So he's saying, okay, we're getting the barley crop in. Next is coming the wheat. I want you to stay here and do the wheat too. Wheat was much more valuable. Barley was the kind of grain for poor people. They raised it, but they really valued wheat. And that was coming next. And he's telling her, you stick around. I'm going to let you glean in the fields of wheat too. Number 8, notice the change in the modifiers used for Ruth in verses 21 and 22. What are the implications? How does it describe Ruth in 21? Moabitess. How does it describe her in 22?
Daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law. Yes, she is a Moabitess, but she's my daughter-in-law. I'm connected to her because she connected herself to me and to my God. Acceptance. Again, that's the title of this section. I'm accepting her as my daughter. Number 9, in what ways was the Lord providing for Naomi and Ruth in verse 23? What 2 things
You need to have a job. And food.
all right? Food, and then also she continued to live with her mother-in-law. There had to be some place they were living. Someone had given them shelter. There are 2 big worries: no food and no place to live. End of chapter 2, verse 20. She's got food. She's got a place to live. She's got plenty. I should say she's sufficient. We're not going to go. You'll have to do the. It's been said that modern Americans are whiners.
They are.
Compare your life with that of Naomi and Ruth. Do you agree? We have so much people, and yet we're whiners.
Which Americans are talking about?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. When a sudden need occurs in your life, how do you initially respond? Like the roof's caving in. Woe is me. All right. Thank you. Let's close with a prayer. Lord, indeed, in every age you care for your people. You've accepted us by your grace into your family of believers. As we live our lives in the week ahead, cause us to trust in you for providing for us. We understand, Lord, that not everything is going to go well in our lives, and yet you're still with us, guiding us, giving us what we need. Ultimately, you've given us eternal life with you. Help us find our confidence in that great truth. Amen. So next week, the vicar is going to be here, and he is going to lead a Bible study on 2 John. Very short letter, 1 chapter long, 2 John. If I could,